Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Fahim Niaz. I am the product manager for Anime Studio. Today's webinar will be on Anime Studio 10.1 and it will be a new features overview. Many of you have asked for this webinar and we're pleased to bring it to you. It will be presented by the Anime Studio team. We have Mike Clifton, who's the lead engineer on the team, who will be leading the presentation. We have Eric Long, who is also a senior engineer on the team. We have Michi Catanese, who is a product relations manager as well as an artist relations manager on the team, as well as Jason Cozy, who is the QA manager as well as the beta team manager. All attendees will be muted, so please note that as well. Please ask questions right away and get those going as fast as you can so that we can answer them throughout the webinar and as well as at the very end of the webinar. This webinar will also be recorded and it will be posted on our website later on today. And with that, Mike Clifton will begin the webinar. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm going to show the new features in Anime Studio 10.1. Some of them are going to be kind of quick to go through, some of them are more involved, but go ahead and ask questions if you see something that we could clear up for you. We're going to start out with a couple of the quick ones. First thing we've added here is an image cropping tool. So if I bring in an image to Anime Studio and I realize that it's not exactly what I want to see, there's a new tool up here for cropping images. So you can either click and drag a region of the image that you want to see, or you can drag these handles to fine-tune it. So in this case, maybe I want to see the entire field except for these weeds down at the bottom. I can just crop them out and I'm done. And then I can go in and I can move the layer around, resize it to fit the output area, and I have a nice field without any weeds anymore if I want to put some characters running around down here at the bottom. So it's a simple cropping tool. There's not a lot to it, but it means you don't have to switch over to an image editing program if all you want to do is crop out a little portion of the image. So it just makes working with images a little bit easier. The next thing I'm going to talk about is copying and pasting between documents. So in Anime Studio 10, we introduced this feature where you can open multiple documents at once and switch between them with tabs up at the top. So now that you can have multiple documents open, you might be working with projects that have multiple shots or multiple scenes, and you may want to copy content from one to the other. So now it's easy to do that. You can select a layer. So here we have the vampire, and he's animated, and he jumps out of his coffin and poops into a bat. So I can select him in the Layers panel, say Edit, Copy Layer, and then I can go to another document or somewhere else in the same document, and I can just say Paste Layer and put the vampire in here with our other characters. And there's the vampire running along with the dog. So it's just a simple way to get content from one document to another by copying and pasting layers. We're going to move on to some of the new features related to animation and the timeline. So first, the timeline has these controls down here. It always has channel, sequencer, motion graph, and some other options for interpolation and stuff. Some of our users with smaller screens have asked to save some space here, and so we've added a way to do that. This button here, if you click it, it gives you the option to hide the timeline options. So if you click that, all those things are gone now, so they don't take up space if you're not really using them. You can still get to them again through this button. Those same controls are all here, plus you can click to show them again. So if we hide these, we save a little bit of space. The playback and view controls we can also hide up in the view menu, show play and view controls. So now we've saved a good chunk of space down here that you can use on a smaller screen for more timeline or more of your canvas to work with. And bring those back. And let's see, another thing related to the timeline is if we have, let's draw a little something here, just a little ball. And now if I move this to the other side and I want to adjust these keyframes, so let's say I want this to be elastic instead. What used to happen is you would get a modal dialog, and now you have this window that stays up. I can change it from elastic to, say, noisy, and now you can see the noisy path that the ball is going to take. And I don't have to click OK, and I can leave this thing open. I can switch to another keyframe. And this keyframe floating window now shows the state of whatever keyframes I have selected in the timeline. So if I go in and I move the ball to some other positions, I can select all these keys and change them from smooth to noisy as well. Or I can make them all elastic so that the ball will sort of be noisy at first, and then the other keyframes it bounces between. So it just allows you access to all the various keyframe properties, including labels, so you can change these to green keyframes, other things like that. And it's a non-modal thing, so it's available all the time. We have some more options for elastic interpolation as well. So if I go back to these, elastic interpolation, I'm going to go to the first one because I know he's moving from the top left to the bottom right. Elastic interpolation now has an option to go backwards. So instead of bouncing at the end, it's going to bounce a little bit and then go to the other side. So that's just some quick stuff in the timeline. One other thing we've got is let's say we have multiple types of animation on this object. So we have rotation, maybe some point movement. So now we see a lot of different keyframes, keyframe types, channel types we call them, in the timeline. If we want to consolidate that, we can say sorry, animation menu. Consolidate layer channels. So it shows just all the channels in one set of keyframes. So it sort of cleans up the view down here. This is the default behavior in Anime Studio Debut. It wasn't available in Anime Studio Pro before, I don't believe, but we added it here in the animation menu. All right, now we're going to show some more actual content related to animation. So here I set up a little ball, and it does a simple bounce, just one time. Now what if I want to make it bounce across the screen? Let me actually select the transform layer tool, and we can see the path that it's taking. So it bounces and stops. Well, the first thing you might think is I'm going to just copy these keyframes. So select all the keyframes, choose copy, and then I go to the end of the bounce, and I say paste. Well, now if we play this animation back, we see what happens. It bounces once, and then it jumps back to the beginning and bounces again. So it's really not what we had in mind, but if you think about it, we're copying the keyframes and pasting them so they're the exact same keyframes. So it would go back to the original position and bounce that same bounce. So what we want to do instead is we copy the keyframes like before, we go to where we want the next bounce to happen, and we say paste relative. And what happens now is it bounces from its current position, gets to another endpoint, and we can say paste relative again, go to the next endpoint, paste relative, and you get it to bounce all the way across the screen. So the difference is once you've copied keyframes, if you paste them, you'll get the same exact keyframes. But if you use paste relative, you get keyframes that begin from the current point and continue on from there. So it allows you to continue a motion on. We never had a keyframe before that was out at this side of the screen, but because we pasted relative, Anime Studio basically added the keyframes onto the current position from before. I see we have a question going back about copy and pasting layers from one document to another, and the question was whether you can copy and paste a character with several layers to another document, and you can. In fact, that vampire had several layers, many layers, I think. If they're all part of a group or a bone layer and you copy the top layer, you can then paste them into the other document. All right, let's see. I'm going to show you something that we've had in mind for a while. Oh, no, actually, this is also about copying and pasting keyframes. So this is another variation. So here we have a simple character. So the reason he's so simple, I actually forgot this feature was new to 10.1 until this morning. So I whipped up a little demo here. Here we have two characters. Okay, here's one, and he does a little jig. Here's another character with different proportions, and if you play it back, you see he has no animation at all. So what I can do now is I can go to the first character, and I can copy some keyframes, and I can go to the second layer, and here's the interesting part. Notice that it's a different layer in a different document, and I can go in and I can paste the keyframes onto this character. So now this character will have similar movement to the first one. So up until now, you couldn't copy and paste keyframes from one layer to another, let alone one document to another. But in Anime Studio 10.1, you can do that. You can copy an animation from one layer in one document and paste it into another layer in another document. The key here is it'll copy all kinds of animation like layer, translation, scale, rotation, and it'll copy bone animation too, but as far as bones go, the bones need to be named the same thing. So these are all just generic names. Here's the bone name up here. Actually, I can show all the labels. But if you're planning to copy from one character to another, you have to name them consistently. So this might be thigh, shin, foot, and if you want the animation to be copied, you have to just make sure they're named the same so that it knows how to map from one character to another. All right, this is where I thought we were going next. This is about timeline markers. So timeline markers are a way to sort of annotate your animation. So let's play this back and see what it looks like. It's some fireworks at New Year's getting ready to be launched into the air. Now, the way I imagine timeline markers would work, this is a completed animation, but I would imagine they would work as sort of a way to make notes based on your sketches before you actually start animating. So here's a use that I could imagine. There's a button here for add marker, and I go to a certain time and I would say, I want a wide shot at this point. And I can change the hold. So a timeline marker appears here, and it's basically a keyframe in the timeline. I can change the hold value. In this case, I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and drag this timeline to the right. So my note is saying that during this period of time, I want a wide shot. So there, see, previously it was a close-up shot of these characters, and then it becomes a wide shot. So if I hadn't had any animation yet, this gives a note to the animator, for example. And we can add in a couple more notes. So I had here a frame 19. I want to nudge. So we see we get to frame 19, and there's the nudge. We had another one, I think at frame 33, there's another nudge. Oops. And then frame 66, let's go to a specific character now. Let's go to this guy. He's this character on the left. And can go in here and add a keyframe or a marker, hop away. And this one I'm not going to make document wide. I'm going to uncheck this, and I'll explain what that is in a second. So let's make this say green marker. So the difference, document-wide markers show up here no matter what layer is selected in the project. You can see these document-wide markers. So they're sort of maybe the more important ones, the ones you want to see all the time. A layer-specific marker only shows up when you have that layer selected. So here, this guy is supposed to hop away at frame 66. And I can just drag these just like keyframes to somewhere else if I want to change the positioning of markers. I can double-click them to rename them. And you can add in a lot of information here. Green firework nudges red firework. Okay, so you can type in a lot of information here, and in the timeline you just see the first line, but if you mouse over the marker you see all the information that goes with it. So you can add extensive notes to animators if you want to. You could also use it for reviewing purposes. You have a first pass at your animation, you hand it off to somebody you're working with, they can go in and add notes along the way and then send it back to you and you can see what they think about it. We're also expecting that some of the more advanced users may use this for scripting purposes. So you could put a marker someplace and then a script might trigger based on positioning of markers. So we expect there may be some creative uses of these in the future. All right, let's move on to a change to bone dynamics. So here's a little animation I thought I would show in case some of the people watching here aren't familiar with bone dynamics. I'm going to first set that up. So here is just a little branched tree thingy, whatever, swinging side to side. And bone dynamics, what that is, I can select some bones in a skeleton, go up to here to the bone constraints, pop up and select bone dynamics. There's several parameters here you can use to adjust the effect. But then when I play it back, watch what happens now, you get this sort of bouncy, springy, automatic animation effect. So this is not a new feature. This is something that's been in Anime Studio for a while. The new part is this. Sometimes, depending on the complexity of a scene, when you play it back here, the bone dynamics wouldn't really look correct. They would sort of get jumpy and out of sync. And that had to do with trying to improve the overall performance of playback, not computing everything while we're previewing stuff here in the timeline. When you rendered the final output, the dynamics would be all correct and everything would look good, but it would be kind of off here on the canvas. So in version 10.1, bone dynamics are computed correctly all the time. So you get what it's actually going to look like. So this is what it would look like in the final output. But what that means is depending on the complexity of the scene, the playback could become slower since it's doing more computation to get the correct effect. So if you find that you're seeing a scene that's just playing back slower than you want, you can go to the animation menu and uncheck Enable Bone Dynamics. So next time it plays through, we'll see the bone dynamics are not happening while we preview here. They're still there, and when you render the final output, you'll get the bone dynamics. It's just sort of a preview thing. You can turn them on or off and choose between either more correct bone dynamics or a faster playback. Right. Let's move on to something about switch layers here. So here's a simple switch layer. Switch layers are used for things like mouths, eyes, hands, and what a switch layer is, it's a group with multiple layers inside it, but only one of those layers can show at a time. So it's great for making a mouth talk, or an eye blink, or a hand change from open to a fist. And when you work with a switch layer, you see keys in the timeline, but until now you didn't really know what was visible at each frame unless you sort of scrubbed through it. But now, if you mouse over a switch keyframe, you can see what layer is visible at that keyframe. And so these that we're seeing here correspond to the names of the mouth shapes. So here we have M, B, P, L, E. These are sort of short, funny names that represent phonemes of speech, but they, you can see what is visible at each frame without necessarily scrubbing through the timeline. Just a quick preview of what's happening with your switch layers. Okay, I'm going to move on to other things besides timeline stuff. Some bone features. Let's see. Shy bones. So this is one of the characters that is included with the standard content, the carnivorous plant. He's got a great little animation, very expressive for a plant. And if you look at him, though, so if you want to just include him in your project, you can play him back like that. But if you look at him and you see these leaves here, you notice that they're moving. How are they moving? What's going on? Well, it turns out that a lot of the bones in this plant are hidden. So if I say show all bones, I'm actually going to hide the content here for a second. You can see that there are a lot of bones that make up this plant. Most of them were hidden initially. Only the ones that the animator sort of considered important were showing. A lot of these, I think, are controlled by dynamics. Others are controlled by smart bones. But it was decided that it isn't really necessary to show them all the time. So we have a new way to support that, and it's called shy bones. So what I'm going to do here, this character was created before shy bones existed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these green bones that I've already highlighted. I'm going to invert the selection so that all the other bones are selected. And now these ones I'm going to mark shy. And what shy bones are, they're bones that you sort of consider not important to see all the time. They're important for the movement of the character, but they're maybe not important for the animator. The animator doesn't need to manually move them around or tweak them a lot. So we can bring them back by using this command, show shy bones. So now they all come back, and now they all go away. And they don't have to stay selected. It's just that way I don't have to remember which ones were not important anymore. I just, once I've marked them as shy, I can go in here and I can hide them all again. And so now I only have the few bones that I have to work with and bring them back again. This is sort of going to be a helpful thing for sophisticated rigs, especially if you have one artist creating the rig and another artist animating it. We have some users doing that, and they don't want the animators to really touch some of the automatically controlled bones. So then if you just make them shy, it's easy to hide what isn't important for animation. Another feature about bones, we've made an improvement for 10.1. See, this is an old character here. It goes back many, many versions. And I used him because he uses point binding. The default is flexi binding in Anime Studio, where bones have sort of an automatic influence over points. But this character was created, I think, before there was flexi binding. Some people still use point binding in their rigs, or you might use a mixture of flexi binding and point binding. The trick is, point binding, the way it works is you mark certain points are controlled by certain bones. So now when I move this character, when you move it, you can see, okay, this hand here is being controlled by the forearm, and the points in the arm up here are controlled by the upper arm. But it's easy to lose track, especially after months or years, like which points are connected to which bones. So we have a little helper now. When you use the bind points tool, any points that are bound show up in bold like this. So in this case, we see that all the points in the character are bound to some bone. In a hybrid rig, you might have some points and not others that are bound this way. But you have some more help here. If we color some bones, so let's make one purple, one green, one down here, we'll make it blue. So now when I go to the bind points tool, not only do I see the highlighted points, I also see colors. So I can see at a glance here which points are bound to which bones. So the purple bone is controlling these purple points, the green bone, the green ones here, and the blue one, the blue points. So in combination with colored bones, it gives you a quick indicator of what points are going to move with what bones. We have some other helper indicators. Here's a character that uses some of the features that were new to Anime Studio 10, the smooth joints. So when you've created a character and maybe you hand it off to someone else who wasn't the creator, they may be confused at first about which bones are moving which points. So let's just try moving this guy around. We can see that the arm moves and stuff like that. So let's say I wanted to add in a new bone. Here I want to put another bone in his arm so that when I move the arm upwards, I want this bone to bulge the muscle. Oh, wait a minute, it's not moving with that bone. Why is that? Well, I can find out now by going into the different body parts. So let's select this arm layer. What happens when you select different body parts, you see highlighted bones. So here we see all the bones are sort of dimmed, except these two in the arm. What that means is this layer, this right arm, was set up to only be controlled by those bones using the use selected bones for flexi-binding command. So at some point somebody selected these two bones and said use selected bones for flexi-binding. Actually in this case they said create smooth joint for bone pair. But you can see that only these two bones are having an influence. If I want this one to be involved also, I would select all three and say use selected bones for flexi-binding. In this case, what I really want is these two, and I want a smooth joint. So I say smooth joint for bone pair, and we see these two are highlighted, and the circle indicates there's a smooth joint around those two. And there are some other bones or other layers in this character that are different. The head, for example, has a single highlighted bone, and that means that the head was bound using this tool, the bind layer tool, to that bone. So it only moves with that one bone. So when we move the character, the head moves with just that bone, and none of the others have influence on it. So it's sort of a helpful way to go back through a character and try and figure out what's going on if you haven't worked with that character in a while. So it might be hard to remember, why is this head not moving with any other bones? You get a highlight now that tells you why that is. This leg, for example, is being controlled by these two, the foot by this one, and you can go through and see what body part is influenced by what bone. I'm going to back up here, and we have a couple of questions. One of them is, what is the difference between shy bones and simply hiding bones? The difference is you can hide any bone. So let's bring back all the bones. I can hide this one, hide selected bones, but it's not a shy bone anymore. And so what that means, if I hide the shy bones and I bring them back, this one is still hidden. So the shy bones are sort of like a collection. If you expect that you might be hiding and showing some bones a lot, then you might mark them as shy, because it's a way to sort of make a group that, that you may want to hide and bring back over and over again, as opposed to a one-time thing. Copying and pasting bones, we have a question about that. What if they don't have the same number of bones in the rigs? That's fine, as long as, so if there are bones that don't exist in one or the other rig, they'll just be ignored. Bones that have the same name will get copied. And you can copy a partial rig too. I'm just going to go back to that real quick. So here, if I say if I just want the legs, I can select just the leg bones. You copy the selected bone keyframes as opposed to all bone keyframes. So I copy that, then I go over here and I paste just those keys in. So now just the legs are moving, not the arms. So it's got some flexibility as far as how you can copy and paste. Another question is, can I hide artwork and only show bones easily? We don't have a specific command for that, but what you can do, here's an example. If I want to hide everything in this bone layer, if you Alt-click one layer, it will hide all the other layers except that one. So I Alt-click the eyeball for the head layer, and then I just regular click the head layer to hide all of them. So it's kind of 2 clicks to hide everything inside, and I can click it and Alt-click to bring them back. So it's, as opposed to like going down the list and clicking everything like this, it's pretty easy to just, yeah, hide and show everything inside. All right. A few changes to the preferences that I wanted to point out. I'll leave that open. This is, so we have a gather media command. If you have a document that references a lot of images, sounds, movies, things like that, and you want to pull everything together, you can use this gather media command. And it'll save the project and all the images and sounds and other media that project references all into one folder. But what that does, then you have that thing sort of sits there by itself and is its own self-contained project. But you're still working on the original project. We have a new command called open and switch to new file after gather, or new preference option. And what this means is once you've gathered the media, that new file becomes the open document. So you're now working on the gathered project. I'm realizing as I say that, I don't know how clear this is, but I think for people who've used gather media, this probably makes sense and is going to be a valuable option as another way to work with gathered media. Another item in the preferences, we don't see it here on a Mac, but in Windows, in the preferences dialog, there's an option to disable GPU. And the reason that existed in Anime Studio Pro, and it had to do with if your graphics card had out-of-date drivers, or there may have been some other issue, it wasn't Anime Studio, you know, if it had some issue running on your system, you could try disabling the GPU. We didn't have that option in Anime Studio Debut. We do have it in 10.1. But the good news is that GPU acceleration is more reliable in 10.1, and hopefully you won't need to disable it, but it's there in the preferences if you suspect a GPU driver issue or something. The last preference I want to point out is down here, allow sending analytics information to Smith Micro. If you leave this checked, The application will periodically send information about like your operating system version, CPU, screen size, memory, some things that will help us understand what kind of hardware our users are using and let us adapt to that and develop accordingly. It also will send a little bit of information about what features you use. Specifically, right now, it can report back on what kind of export formats we're using, because we currently are supporting quite a large number of movie formats, and it's difficult to keep track of all that. So the better we know what formats users prefer, the better we can concentrate our efforts on those. Okay. Layer settings. Here's a simple document. I'm going to render this, render what the final output looks like. So here, one of these layers has a drop shadow on it and the others don't. I can go in and I can select multiple layers, bring up the layer settings dialog, and now each of these tabs has an option here that says copy, in this case, all shadow settings to other selected layers. So I'm not really changing any of the settings, but I want to copy them from the selected layer to the other selected layers. And I say OK. And now when I render the final output, we can see that all three layers have the same drop shadow effect applied. So it's a handy way to copy information from one layer to a whole group of selected layers instead of having to go in and look at all the different shadow settings and apply them to each one. So, quick demo of that, but I think that'll be handy. All right, we have a couple new scripts in there with some fun effects. So this one, the script I'm going to show you here is called Unroll Shapes. And so here's just a little set of vector shapes that just drift up and don't really do much of anything. But what I can do, I can take this new visibility Unroll Shapes script. And this script applies to vector layers. And I can choose if I want to show or hide the shapes. I'm going to show these shapes. And I'm just going to leave the default settings here. And what this does, it automatically adds a bunch of keyframes. When I play it back, you can see the shapes unrolling. I'm going to step through it slowly because I'm not sure what kind of frame rate we get through the webinar. But if we step through it, you can see that the shapes are sort of cascading into visibility. Hopefully that came across. And we can make them disappear as well. So we can go back and we can say unroll shapes. This time I want to hide the shapes. And if I step through that, they'll collapse again. So it's just sort of a neat way to get an effect that would, if you were going to animate that by hand, that'd be a lot of keyframes to have to put together. There's a similar script for layers. Here it works on a group of layers. So here we have text where each letter of the text is a separate layer all inside a group. So for this group I can go in and I can say collapse layers. So in this case I'm going to show the layers and I'm going to slow it down. Instead of over 24 frames, I'm going to make it happen over 60 frames or something so that we can see what's going on. And when I press play, you can see the text sort of appears with a little bit of wobble to it. So it's a way of sort of cascading the visibility of a group of layers. And again, this one can also work in reverse, so I can hide the layers instead of showing them. And now from here they're going to hide. So if I put them together and play the whole thing, the layers first show themselves and then hide themselves. So for text I think it's a neat effect and you can see right away how that'll work. But it also works for any kind of group. So here's the carnivorous plant again. And he just bounces around and catches a fly. But I can use the unroll shape script, or collapse layers script on him. So I'm going to show him over the course of 90 frames. We'll make it kind of slow in this case. But what happens is the various parts of the plant are going to sort of pop into existence one after another. And that was kind of slow so that you can see what's going on, but sometimes running it quickly gives you a neat effect of having a character sort of pop into place. Let's try. Yeah. So there's our two new scripts in Anime Studio Pro in the visibility submenu of the scripts menu. Collapse layers and unroll shapes.
Mike, I have a question regarding unroll shapes.
Okay.
Jump into something new. What determines the order of appearing?
The order that the shapes appear is the stacking order that they exist in the layer. So the bottommost shape appears first, and then the next one up, and the next one up. And then for collapse layers, it's the order that they appear here in the layers palette, bottom to top again.
Okay. And the other question regarding that is, can you choose parts to unroll, or is it just everything?
It's everything.
In that group?
Yes, everything in that group. You could go in and you could delete keyframes afterwards if you wanted to, but right now you can't select parts of it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, we've got a big feature here that I've been holding off. We want to spend some time with that. And that is FBX export. So here's our character again. And we have a new option in the file menu to export FBX. What is FBX? FBX is a 3D interchange format. So it's a file format generally used for 3D files, and it's supported by a wide variety of software. Unity, in particular, is what we've been targeting with our FBX export. Unity is a game development environment, so not all Anime Studio users are game developers, but I think there is a subset that might be very interested in the possibility of it. We can now export Anime Studio files and import them into Unity. FBX files can also be imported into other 3D applications like Maya, 3ds Max, Cinema 4D, and Poser. And Anime Studio at its heart really is sort of a 3D program. We can look at things from 3D. Here's the camera, here's the character. Many scenes in Anime Studio happen to be flat, but they don't have to be. There's actually a reasonable compatibility between Anime Studio and these 3D programs. So how does it work? Well, I'm going to show you this character a little bit. This character, I don't know if I played him back before, but his default animation is to walk across the screen. He also has some actions set up here. He has a jump action and a kick action. So just some simple animations on this character. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to say export FBX. So I'm going to save that where I want my FBX file to go. And as it's saving, I'm going to bring up Unity. So here's the Unity game development environment, just sort of a blank project right now. We've got a timeline and a content region. So let's see, Anime Studio is done exporting. I'm going to take that FBX file, here it is, and let's hide Anime Studio. This is the FBX file created by Anime Studio. If I drag it into my assets in Unity, here's the character. Now you'll see he looks a little weird in this view. By default, Unity hasn't brought up one of the animations, but if I expand the character, we can see a lot of different parts in here. Here's his body as a 3D mesh, an ear. None of it looks very interesting, the part that is interesting is if you look down here a ways, you see the animations. So here's his mainline animation if I bring him into the proper view. If I can play that back, here he is in Unity animating. And this is not just a rendered movie. This is the body parts are there. The animation is actual 3D parts moving around. There's also the kick animation and the jump animation. So these are all here in Unity. Unfortunately, I'm not an experienced Unity user, so hooking these up to a full game environment with joystick controls and stuff is beyond me, but we've talked to some people that have shown us how to do it. It's just a little more involved than I want to get into in the webinar here, but you could create an animation where the character is walking along, and then by pressing a button in the game environment, he switches over to his jump animation or the kick or whatever, and you can bring in multiple assets this way and map them to a game environment. Again, because it's 3D, you can actually position stuff in 3D in Anime Studio, so I don't really want to go into that too much, but I can rotate the head at a weird 3D angle here, put perspective on things, and all that translates into Unity as well. So it's sort of our first pass here at Unity FBX output, and we want to see what kind of games people can create. I've got a couple other things I'm going to show about this, but I think we may have some questions too.
Actually, it's just a quick statement.
Yeah.
One of our beta testers was on the line attending the webinar, William, and he mentioned that he was able to take the FBX output and import it into Unreal 4 Engine.
Great.
Use it there. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
So we'll put that on the list too.
I think there's a question.
There is one more question with FBX. Is the FBX a polygonal mesh?
Yes, it is.
And does it come with its own texture map?
Yes, it outputs actually multiple polygonal meshes, one for each vector or image layer, and they're texture mapped. The texture map is included in the FBX file, so it's a self-contained file at that point. This is also about FBX that I'm going to show here. Many things are supported, not everything is supported when we output to FBX, in particular point binding. So when we output vector layers to FBX, we actually output them as if they were an image. So we create a little 3D mesh around the vector layer and texture map it with an image of the vector layer, not the actual vector shape. And that's because for game purposes, it would be too complex, too big a hit on memory and performance and everything to output all the vector information. So that means vector-specific features do not get exported to FBX. So point binding, point animation, lines or stroke width and curvature animation, none of those get exported to FBX. So you have to sort of imagine your vector layers as if they were image layers. So you can draw your vector artwork, but then don't animate it during your animation if you're intending to output to FBX. So we have a little sort of helper feature in Anime Studio for this. So here's a character that uses point binding. And if I outputted this to FBX, it would not look the way it does here in Anime Studio because point binding isn't supported. But I can go to the View menu and select FBX Preview Mode. And what that does is it looks now how it would in an FBX supporting application like Unity. And so point binding is disabled. Point animation, if there were point animation in this project, would also be disabled. And you sort of see what it would be like without having to go through the export, import, test process. And this doesn't actually change your project. It just temporarily disables the features that are not supported by FBX export. So that'll be a helpful thing. when working with FBX. I would recommend not just taking any existing Anime Studio content and outputting it as FBX. It sort of takes some thought in how you set up your project. Really the key thing to keep in mind is if you use image layers, everything should be fine. If you use vector layers, just sort of treat them as if they were image layers and don't animate the points. Don't bind the points, nothing specific to any vector point. That's all I had for FBX, unless we have any questions at the moment.
No, I think you addressed. Oh, let me check. This is kind of a long one. Let's see.
We can come back to it if you want to review
it.
And
because it might be a little complex. I may want to
follow up later.
Follow up, yeah.
Okay. We have another export option, and that is in the file menu, export as version 9 file. So what this does is it saves the Anime Studio file without any version 10 features in it. So I imagine many of you who are using Anime Studio 10 won't really need this feature, but particularly we learned from some of our studio users who are working with this professionally. They wanted to sort of evaluate version 10, but when they hadn't committed to it yet, they wanted to be able to take any artwork they created and bring it back to version 9, and this allows you to do that. Of course, there are certain things that if you use Anime Studio 10 features, they're not going to work in Anime Studio 9, but all the basic core features will.
I'd like to point out to current motion artist users that this is a way to utilize Anime Studio 10 and get some of your projects out to motion artists, but keep in mind what Mike just said, the new features won't save out to that format.
And the last thing I wanted to show is sort of tangentially related to Anime Studio, and that is Papagayo. I'm not sure if we have any Papagayo users on the line, but Papagayo is sort of a companion application. It's a lip syncing program. And so what it does is it allows you to, let's pick an example. It allows you to open up an audio file, type in the text that is being spoken, and then adjust the words and the phonemes to match up to that text. And you can see, we're not going to have the audio coming through, but over here on the right you can see the mouth that moves along with it. Anyway, Papagayo has existed for a number of years, but it has had trouble running on current operating systems. But there's a new version of Papagayo out. This is Papagayo 2.0, and it's available now on lostmarble.com/Papagayo. It's very much the same as Papagayo 1.0, but it's compatible with current operating systems. It's faster, and it's a better foundation for us to add new features. So if you want to do some lip syncing, look into Papagayo, and it's ready to go now. It's actually an open source project. If anybody wants to work on enhancements, you're welcome to do so. So if we have any further questions?
Absolutely. Let me ask a couple other questions related to Anime Studio 10.1. The strings in Anime Studio 10.1 have also been localized. Maybe you can speak about that, Mike.
That's right. 10.1, I'm showing it in English, of course, here, but it's also available in German and Spanish. And they're not separate versions. It's all built into the application. On Windows, you can choose in the preferences what language you want to run in. On Mac, it chooses based on your operating system settings. So if you're a German or Spanish speaker, you can start running natively now with version 10.1.
Thank you very much. I have a really simple question that actually came in through Facebook the other day, and I'm hoping that the user is actually in on this webinar. But he had some issues parenting his bones. Maybe if you could show a simple rig and how you parent those bones.
I'm going to go back to one of these simple rigs. So this tool here looks like a short length of chain is how you reparent bones. If you click that tool, what you see is an arrow from a bone to its parent. And so this rig is set up correctly. I'm going to create a rig that's set up incorrectly. So if I wasn't really thinking about the rigging and I was drawing a character similar to this, I draw out the legs, I draw out this other leg. When I draw a bone, it's parented to the currently selected bone, or it's a child of the currently selected bone. So if you were watching what I was doing here, when I drew this upper leg bone, this foot was selected, so it's parented incorrectly. And you can see when you start moving the bones around that they don't move the way you'd want. They move kind of crazy. So the way to fix that is with this, this reparent bone tool. It shows you the arrows, and I see that this one is pointing to the foot when it should really be attached to the body. So what I can do is I can select this bone by holding down the Alt or Option key and clicking on it, and then selecting the bone I want to be its parent. This bone is also reaching way across, so I can Alt-click that and select the proper parent. And this one too, I can Alt-click this and select the proper parent. So you can see now that this is parented as I would want, and I can go ahead and test it, and it'll move correctly.
So the next question is actually in relation to importing JPEG or PNGs. How would you import a JPEG or a PNG? That was a question that was asked by a user.
I think during the demo what I did is I just dragged it into the window, so you can do that. If you have a JPEG file, you can drag it into the window and it gets imported as a new image layer. You can also click the new layer button, and when you select image, then it'll prompt you to go and pick an image file. Same thing, just a different way of doing it. And then there's a third way, File, Menu, Import. So here you can import a variety of different things. One of them is images. Audio is in here, 3D models, various things. And you select image, and again you're prompted to choose the image file.
Okay, thank you. The other question that's related to this is how do you import a PSD?
Same thing, PSD is just another image file we support. So I do have one. So the neat thing about PSDs is when you import a PSD, right, so this character that we looked at before is comes from a PSD file. So when I choose a PSD, I'm prompted whether I want the composite, so the whole image as a single image, or whether I want individual layers. If I choose composite, it's just like importing a JPEG. But individual layers is where things get fun, because now I see each layer in the PSD as a separate image layer. So in this case, in the PSD, there was a blue background. I don't want that. But I can, I'm actually going to hide all of them. I can see that the layers here are all separate parts. So that means a PSD can be animated in a way that a JPEG can't. So if you keep your character separated in a PSD file, it just gives you a lot of flexibility in how you can move things around. So the character I used during some of the demos was rigged so that the body parts were linked together. In this case, they're still just sort of raw PSD layers, but you can see how they're not attached, that they're separate, and allows you to animate things flexibly.
Thank you, Mike. So we have a few minutes left with the webinar. If you have any questions, please make sure to ask those right away so that we can get to as many as possible. Otherwise, we'll try to get to those either on social media or through some other means. But the first question that I have here is, can you set the frame rate for thumbnail preview? The frame for thumbnail?
Yeah, sorry, I have bad handwriting. I was trying to pass off the question to Fahim. The question is, can you set the frame for the thumbnail preview? And the answer is that thumbnail preview will will use whatever art is on your canvas or your artboard. So whatever you're viewing in the app currently, when you save it, should be saved as your thumbnail.
And what we're talking, just in case somebody doesn't know, the thumbnail preview is when you look at a file. Here I'm in the Finder on a Mac, but in Windows Explorer you can see a preview for the different anime files. So these are some of the files that I used during the webinar, and you see the thumbnail. Some of them are older files and don't have one, but you can see a thumbnail here or in a quick view.
So how do you set the exact thumbnail that you want to save? Is that where you saved last?
Yeah, it's when you currently save the project, whatever you see is.
All right. Okay. Perfect. The next question is, why not integrate Papagayo into Anime Studio?
Well, so Anime Studio has its own lip syncing solution built in. It's based on, it does an audio analysis of an audio file and automatically finds phonemes in it. Papagayo, on the other hand, is a different way of lip syncing. It's a little more, takes a little more work, although it does help you out. The reason for not integrating them is because it takes an amount of work to analyze and lip sync an audio file. You may not want it attached to a particular animation. So once I've, if I lip sync a 1 minute speaking audio file with this guy and then I want to apply it to another character, I suppose you could copy and paste the layers between documents, but it's really a property of the audio file, not of the animation project. So that's sort of how I think of it. Then you have a lip sync file to go with the audio that can be used in any number of animations. There are people using Papagayo outside of Anime Studio as well, and they're welcome to do that. People have been using it with Blender and Lightwave that I've heard of, and probably other things as well.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, where can I find scripts? Are there any websites where I can find scripts?
Yes, actually, if you go to the Help menu, don't we have...
Yes, we do.
I don't usually go here, so let me figure out where it is. No, that's not it. It tells you about the installed scripts.
Well, some of the websites that people can go to include animestudioscripts.com. That's
Okay.
a particular website that they can go to, as well as they can go to Lost Marble and go to the forum area. There is a script section, and they can figure out what new scripts have been out, what people are using, as well as there's lots of help there as well as far as how to integrate scripts in their software or in their animations. So the next question is, do we have any plans to increase compatibility with Anime Studio and Motion Artist so that they're current with one another? I can address that question, and yes, we are definitely going to be making sure that the compatibility with Motion Artist and Anime Studio are a little bit more current with one another, so stay tuned for that. And just a bit of information for you, the same team that works on Anime Studio works on Motion Artist as well, and their back end is very much similar in nature. So let me ask Jason if he has any questions for Mike.
Yes, there is. Can you hear me okay? There is a question about copying layers again.
Yeah.
And they're wondering if they can copy a layer with smartphone actions and paste it along with the actions. Is that?
Yes, there's some qualifiers there. So here's an example. The carnivorous plant again. He has several smartphone actions. So if I copy the top level here, the bone layer, and all the contents within it, it will copy everything, all the bones, all the visible parts and the actions and the SmartBone actions, and it'll copy and paste those into the new document. Now, if I copy, let's say, the head, so the head has some SmartBone actions here. Mouth and mouth 2, I think, are the two SmartBone actions, and they're controlled by this bone. So this is sort of a detailed technical explanation, but here's a SmartBone action moving the mouth. If I copy just the head, I will copy the actions attached to the head, but I wouldn't copy the SmartBone because I don't have the bone layer selected. So actually, I can just do that. It's copy layer, and if I paste that layer, I get the head in a new document. And if I look in the actions window, I have the smart actions here, but since I didn't copy the bone layer, I don't have the mouth bone that controls these actions. So if I created a new mouth bone, it would work. It just, those actions are not being used now because I didn't copy the smart bones. So I hope that answers the question. You do copy everything. It just, if you copy parts of it, they're not going to be connected anymore if you don't copy the whole thing.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. I believe that's pretty much it for questions. What we'll do is we'll start winding down the webinar, but I did want to address the particular point about scripts in the link from within Anime Studio. It's actually under the scripts menu and about or other popular scripts. So users can actually go there and check out other scripts that are extremely popular that could be used within Anime Studio. And with that, I'd like to thank Mike and the rest of the team for helping out with this presentation, and wanted to thank everybody that attended the webinar. So thank you for your time, for spending over an hour with us. We really appreciate it. Should you have any more questions related to Anime Studio, please feel free to visit our website, anime.smithmicro.com, as well as if you'd like more information about webinars. We try to have them regularly. You can check out my.smithmicro.com/webinars for information regarding new as well as past webinars. And as well, should you have any questions or you'd like to get some peer reviews or information regarding how to animate from fellow animators, please make sure to check out the Lost Marble website. Finally, as well, make sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And I believe we have one last page here. Should you want to stay current with deals on Anime Studio, I would definitely recommend that you join our email list. The link is available there for you to check out, as well as if you have your own website or if you'd like to spread the word, make a little bit of money regarding Anime Studio, then try to become an affiliate if you'd like, and the link there is available for you as well to go to. And then finally, if you're a student or a teacher and you'd like some educational pricing, please check out the my.smithmicro.com/campus link. And with that, I want to thank everybody for spending all this time with us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.